Let's talk a little bit about the Twitter files for a second. There has definitely been some stuff of value that are in these archives. It's interesting to see how moderation works. It's interesting to see how in certain instances it's just a matter of incompetence. It was good that Twitter, I think, had a firewall between its PR and comms people, and but it also shows how difficult it is to determine what you're going to moderate and where. I also think that like some of the revelations about the relationship between, Twitter giving almost like a whitelist pass to some governmental agencies.
Yeah, the Fong reporting.
Yes. Inappropriate, and there needs to be more investigations on that, to the extent that we can.
The other part is like that libs of TikTok was in violation of rules, but given special dispensation.
Right. We saw also that, conservatives would get like a higher threshold to be bounced from the platform, despite the fact that they were unleashing hate. Now, the downsides of this are that these are selective leaks by a person, a billionaire, with an agenda, regardless of the fact it just so happens that he has a very conservative agenda, but any agenda should be suspect. And the other thing that has also been really sort of about this is that people who perceive themselves as actual journalists, it's one thing to give it to like a Barry Weiss who's just like an opinion journalist. And really, to the extent that she's done any reporting, it's basically like, who's the woke person on campus that is harassing her favorite professor? Who, and that guy, Schillenberger, who is I don't even know what reporting he's ever done.
Schmuck,
yeah, she's like, hey, I'm the only one who can harass professors and try to get them canceled.
Yes, it has to be, they have to be Palestinian. But it's also been fascinating to watch the demise of Matt Taibbi sell out any of his sort of like former journalistic principles. Now, I'm not making that accusation. Matt Taibbi is making that accusation. Remember, Elon Musk gave Matt Taibbi a specific part of the archive, right? Just a specific part of the archive, because we know we don't have access to all of it.
And we know there were conditions as well, and we also know that there's stuff that hasn't been reported, including from Taibbi himself, saying that there were communications between the Trump White House and Twitter, which should be newsworthy. If the Biden campaign's communications were newsworthy, the Trump White House's would definitely be, would it not?
It's far worse because they're a government.
They're in office.
They're not a campaign. They're not like some business essentially trying to get elected. Hey, man, don't write that story about our cars, smelling bad or whatever it is. That happens all the time with this social media. But the real point is that you have journalists walking out there who have built their reputation on being journalists and had principles even as short ago as a year ago, saying like, you don't take information like that. But again, this is not my accusation. It's an accusation made against Matt Taibbi by Matt Taibbi. It's an accusation made against Matt Taibbi 2022 from Matt Taibbi 2021 on the Joe Rogan program.
The story that's like sort of apropos to all this is in Seymour Hersh's book, it's his memoir, Reporter. There's a story about how in the early 90s, the CIA wanted everybody to know that they had caught, I think it was an Israeli spy. And so they called up Hersh because Hersh was the biggest, investigative reporter in the country. And they invited him in and they said, look, we're going to show you all this material, right? And they brought him into a room and they just gave him a whole packet of stuff, right? But he couldn't, his entire body rebelled. He's like, I had spent my whole life getting the things. I could not be handed the things. You know what I mean? Because it's just not in his nature, right? Like to be spoon-fed, right? And I think that's true with comics, with any kind of journalist. Like once you start getting handed things, then you've lost. You know what I mean? They have you at that point, and you got to get out of that habit. It's like, or you can't cross that line.
You can't cross that line. You can't. But if you want to be on a talk show,
yeah, you cannot cross that line because then they have you.
That was a weird.
That's what's frustrating about the thing. To the extent that there's anything real here, and there's plenty, I assume, to be interesting to the public about how a major communications network is governed. You can't. I mean,
even our Slack channel would be somewhat interesting, but not that.
Yeah, but you can't trust like the Fong stuff. Fong even said he was given a certain part of this, but he wasn't is handled as much as the other people were. But that said, there's stuff with regards to the Saudi influence on Twitter and maybe the Israeli influence on Twitter. Is Barry Weiss going to be digging into that?
Yes, you don't know. We don't the idea that Elon Musk does not have an agenda here is beyond naive. It's insane. You have to be willfully ignorant.
You have to be a useful idiot.
And yes, and to accept this cache of stuff and just assume that you're reporting the full story and not just doing the bidding of a lot when they said we can't release this because we're doing some fact checking. This is Musk saying, I want this tranche of stuff given because he has an agenda. And Taibbi, as recently as a year ago, understood this dynamic. You're being used. And as soon as you cross that line, it's over.
Yeah, but it's just easier to stomach that when you become central to a billionaire's narrative who owns a major social media platform, and then you can have you can direct people to your Substack. That's what it is. It's money now. That's the difference.
It's money. It's delusions of grandeur. It's just general delusions of being aggrieved, I think, in his case. Yeah. And it's a shame because
he knows better and he thinks everyone's stupid.
Yep.
He's treating everybody as if they're stupid. I mean, in the Fong thing, here's my reported piece with more detail. I was given access to Twitter for a few days. I signed/agreed to nothing. Twitter had no input into anything I did or wrote. The searches were carried out by a Twitter attorney, so what I saw could be limited.
Could be.
And it's just all this stuff, this is what a limited hangout is, right?
Yeah, what is the value then if the attorney is present and providing you with information? What is the value?
Look, I mean, I think there's certain... that's the thing is you can't
assess
separate
it. It's really the problem.
From the meta conversation.
You can't assess it. That's the thing. There may be value there, but you can't assess it. You can't trust it because of that.
I would love to see the Twitter archives in full. I would love to see find some sort of leak where we were able to see files from a certain period of time, but not handpicked and selected by Elon Musk. I mean, that's the opposite of what journalism should be on this front.
Now, just as evidence of the fact that Taibbi, sort of has had a 360 or a 180 on this, play this clip. It just came through from Dorsey. This clip right here. Again, last December, once you get handed things, you're lost. And then take it. Yeah. Volume.
The fact that Elon has an agenda here is not in any way disqualifying. But given that you're sort of dependent on him and his process for what documents are ultimately able to review, how have you been able to ease your own concerns that what you're looking at isn't somehow cherry-picked or skewed or selective versus a more complete picture?
Well, I mean, the minute I get the indication that I'm being played or something like that, I'll of course, jump out of the airplane. I mean,
pause it.
But I haven't
pause
seen
it. In other words, just trust me. Yep. I got this. There's no principle associated with this. Even though I look back a year ago, I was reading Seymour Hersh's book, and he's telling the idea is when you get handed it. Not whether you think you're being played. You're being played when you get handed it. It's over.
Yeah, he said, and he corrected himself. He was originally going to say it's hard to get out of that habit.
Right.
And then said, well, you can't actually get into that habit at all.
All right, continue.
Not at all. I've had no indication of that.
Oh, okay.
Look, people keep bringing this up. We go, you're doing PR for the richest man in the world. And what about his motives, blah, blah. And, like, it doesn't matter. Like, journalists, we don't care where the information comes from. If it's true, we want to look at it. I know what my motives are. My motives are, I'm looking at, like, I'm getting a unique look into the underbelly of how censorship works in this country, and how the FBI, the DHS, the Pentagon, like all of these institutions and how they operate in secret. That's an incredible opportunity, and I know what I'm looking for. So it doesn't. I guess there might be motives that he might have, but that doesn't matter. For the integrity of the project, all we have to do is make sure that the stuff that we're looking at is true and accurate, and that we're drawing the correct conclusion.
The idea. I mean, the idea that the context does not matter at all. I mean, it's one thing for him to get this information and look at it and think this is interesting, but then you do further reporting.
You vet it.
You not just vet that this stuff is true. And if you think this is true, I can tell you something that is true between a conversation that you and I have. But if I don't share your half of the conversation, just my half of the conversation, it's true. We still don't know what the nature of the conversation was. You can't look at one siloed thing that is chosen by a guy who you think he has an agenda. Of course he has an agenda. It's not reporting. You're just putting out what he is giving you. I mean, would he, if the CIA sat down with him and said, here's a file, every single thing in it is true, report it as is, you don't think that he would say, like, I'm a little suspect of this. Why does the CIA want to give me this? Wait a second. This is the CIA's perspective. What about the perspective of the people living on the ground? Yeah. Even if they say what is true, like, that's all bullshit. The amount of self-delusion or rationalization or whatever, like, I don't know why he's doing it. I know what the value accrued to him is, but I don't know if that's why he's doing it as much as a sense of aggrievement, or I had been wrong before, or this is the way I make my bones as a contrarian, or whatever it is, or just like, I know better than everybody else. The reason why this question keeps coming up is because it's
question.
So obvious.
Fundamental.
Yes, and honestly, the stakes are much lower with this, but this is indistinguishable from what Judith Miller essentially was doing during her reporting at the New York Times, which was like, I hear this from my national intelligence source, and because it is told to me, and I've made an assessment that this is the fact, I'm going to report it. And
she was worse. I think she was a little bit more nefarious.
But I mean, and that's why I say the stakes were much higher in that instance, and you have to really do your due diligence on that front. But like, that was the exact kind of reporting that this crop of reporters was critiquing and saying we need to be different and better than this. And he's essentially saying, this guy has given me information and I trust it, and that's all I really need to say. That's all I really need to provide for you.
Honestly, it's the capitalists, not the government, and I think for like a lot of the libertarians in the audience of these guys, that's enough.
And they're not reporting on what the Trump administration did at this time when they were the only government entities who were contacting Twitter.
Well, that's political. And I mean, that's the thing is, like, that's the basic, that's media literacy 101, or maybe it's 102, which is that why are you learning what you are learning when you're learning it in which sort of publication? And like the thing, like, well, if some of the stuff is true, that's all that matters. Well, like, the CIA knows that. That's why they'll admit to certain smaller things to keep you off of bigger things. And I repeat, how about you do a control find about Saudi Arabia or what Israel wants to do with regards to these things, as opposed to just Democrats the entire time?
The idea that stuff hasn't been vetted out is ridiculous. And honestly, what the internal conversations are about the purchase of Twitter for $44 billion, that's not interesting. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Wait, I would love to see, I mean, this is Mr. Transparency. Are we going to have some sort of Twitter files on any pieces of information that started once Elon Musk purchased Twitter?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, so
of course
not transparency for thee and not for me, and it's not even transparency at all.